Okay, so today's daf yomi is Bamitzia daf tzadi dawad Bamitzia 94. So we're going to start at the Mishnah on the bottom of 93b. The Mishnah says Zev Echad, if because we're trying to figure out what's going to be considered an ones, so an accident, so much so that if you're a hired worker, you're going to be exempt. So let's say there was one wolf that came and attacked your flock that you're watching. Ain't no onus. That's not going to be considered an accident. You should have stopped it. But Shnei Zevim, but two wolves are an onus. Rabbi Huda says, well, it depends what time of the year it is. Bishas Mishlachat Zevim, it's a time that the wolves are going out like a pack. Then Av Zev Echad Ones, and even one, uh, um, then even one wolf is considered an onus because if they're all acting in a frenzy, then even one wolf is very dangerous. Shnei Koavim, two dogs, ain't no onus. If there are two dogs, excuse me, if there is Shnei Kawabim, if there are two dogs, then it is not an ones. It's not an accident. Yadua Ba'abli Omer Mishum Rabbi Meir Miruach Achas ein ones. If they're coming from one direction, that's not an accident. But Mishtei Ruchos, but if the two dogs are coming from two different directions, then we're going to say that's an ones. That is an accident, and he's not responsible. Halistim, if there are bandits, is an onus, that's an accident, that he's not responsible. Hariva, Dova, Namarva, Bardos, Vanochashis are lions, and bears, and leopards, hyenas, and snakes, Areo, and this is an accident, he's not responsible. Amasai, when is that the case? Bizman Shabo Me'alein, when they came on their own. However, let's say he brings the sheep on the safari where there's a lot of wild animals, onus, that's an accident and he's responsible. Mesa Kedarko, let's say the animal dies in a normal manner, Hareza onus, has a heart attack, it's not the shepherd's responsibility, but Safka, but Sigfa, let's say he afflicted it, didn't feed it enough, or he put it in the summer and too much heat. Well, Mason, then it died, that's not an accident. It's his fault. Also, Roche Tzukin enough. If he took it up on the mountain and it fell down, onus, that's an accident. Hell, or Roche Tzukin, but let's say he took it up on the mountain, enough for Mesa, and it falls down and he dies, onus, that's not an accident. So we go on. Tanya, is it really the case that one wolf is an accident? But then we have a brisa that says that one wolf is an accident. It's only during the time of the wolves going as a pack, and they're in a frenzy. That's where one wolf is even an accident. The robbers are an accident. If a robber comes upon you, that it's not responsible. It's an onus. So Gemara asks the question: why don't we say that this man, the guy you hired, should stand up against these shepherds? I'm a rob, they're armed robbers. So so now we ask the question, let's say the shepherds are armed. I mean, so you gave him a weapon. So then versus the armed robbers, is he still not responsible? Do we say let's stick the one man against the other man, they can protect himself? But maybe on the other hand, the robber he's really ready to give his life for it. Whereas the shepherd is a hired hand. He's not ready to give his life, so he doesn't have to. So it's a total accident, therefore. So it's logical to say that since the robber is going to give his life, the shepherd's not responsible because it's an accident. But let's say the shepherd finds a robber before it took anything from him at all, and he basically exaggerates to him, and he insults him, and he incites him because let's say he meets the robber and he says to him, basically, you're a terrible robber, but let me just, he's telling him, I'm staying in this camp, and and we have this many men. Ba'adan. I have this many dogs, Ba'adan. And I have this many, basically, Raj said these are braids. but this is like a reference to slingshots, right? She says, "Climb on the column to Evan." So, the Azal, the Shakal Minay, and then the robber goes and takes basically from him. So, under those circumstances, do we say it's still an accident? That's the guy who goes to the dangerous place. You're inciting a robber. What do you think is going to happen? Okay, we're up to the next mission on top of Tzadi Dawud Amid Aleph. The mission says, the unpaid watchman can say, "I'll watch this for you on the condition that if it gets lost, I don't even have to take an oath." And the borrower says, "I'll borrow on the condition that if anything happens, I don't have to pay for it." No, say the one who's paid and the renter, they could also do it, say, "I'm going to work on the condition that I don't have to pay for anything. I'm exempt from an oath." Generally speaking, we say whoever makes a condition against the Torah, the stipulation is not valid. The call tonight, and any stipulation which has the action first before the requirement of the stipulation is going to be canceled. Rashi says, what we're talking about here is we put the action that he has to do prior to the condition, meaning to say that he's asking for. So let's say there's an action, and if you do this action, then if you do this action, then I'm going to do this. So basically what we have to say is it's not going to be valid. Basically, if he has to say it in a manner, he has to say what you have to do before he says what he's going to give him. So he has to say you're going to do this, and then I'm going to do that. So look at Rashi. Shehiktiv Maisa. So kol tanai sheyesh bo Maisa b'tchilato tanai bato. So any stipulation which he puts the action before the stipulation is canceled. Rashi says Shehiktiv Maisa shalav la'aso tanai. He puts the action that he has to do before the stipulation that he's asking from him. So, for example, could go in Hare Maisa Shalcha. This action will be yours im tased dvar ploni, if you do this thing. So if he says this thing will be yours if you do this, that's not going to be valid because you have to first do this and then I'll give you the action. So Dami l'tanai b'nei Gad b'nei Ruvain, Rashi says it's not similar to the stipulation of Gad and Ruvain, where it says if you will cross over, then you will give it. Meaning to say, first you have to say what you have to do, and then he's going to say we'll give you the land. Now you have to put the stipulation before. That's what it means to have the stipulation before the action. If you do this, then I'll in return give you that. And so that's the way you have to do it. So the Gemara says, and if the stipulation that you could do before the action will be valid. For example, let's say he says, like we just said, if he states what you have to do before he gives him the thing, then it's going to be valid. So we'll see what the Gemara says. First of all, the Gemara says, why can you make a stipulation that the Shomer Chinim doesn't have to take an oath? Isn't he making a condition against what's written in the Torah? Anybody who makes a conditional clause against what's written in the Torah, it's going to be disqualified. Gemara says, no, Hamani, our mission follows like Rabbi Yehuda, that you can make a condition when it comes to a monetary matter, even though it's against the Torah. The Tanya, Omer Isha, so you say, a woman, marry me on the condition I don't have to support you. I don't have to give you the marital responsibilities of food, clothing, or intimacy. It's valid, but the stipulation is canceled. So the marriage is valid. That's the position of Rabbi Meir, where Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda says, if it's the monetary matters, like the food and the clothing, the condition is going to be upheld. So the Gemara says, but wait, I mean, matzis mufmas like Rabbi Yehuda. Can we really say that our Mishnah is like Rabbi Yehuda? No, if that's the case, Ema Seifa, the next clause says, whoever makes a stipulation against what's written in the Torah is canceled. Also in Rabbi Meir, you want to say that that clause goes according to Rabbi Meir? So the Gemara says, Halal Kasha. No, it's not difficult. Olam Rabbi Yehuda. The whole Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda. The Seifa b'davar she'en l'shamamon. The second clause is referring to a non-monetary matter. Gemara says, if that's the case, Ema Seifa, that what's bad about the third clause? Kol Tanai she'ech bo ma'aseh b'tchilaso Tanai batal. Any stipulation which has the action first before the obligation of what the person has to do is going to be canceled. Man shamaslei the islay hasvara. Who's the one who says that's Rabbi Meir? That's Rabbi Meir. The Tanya Abba Chalafta ish Kfar Chananya, because we learned Abba Chalafta of Kfar Chananya said Mishum Rabbi Meir. Tonight call him a Maisa. Harei tonight. If you put the condition, i.e., what I'm going to give you, what you have to do before the action that I'm going to do for you, that's a valid tonight. Maisa call them tonight, but if you do what I'm going to give, if you do the action, what you have to do prior to the, if you do the action that basically, if you do the action that I'm going to do for you before you put what he has to do, Maisa called him tonight, tonight, and it's not a condition. So therefore, the Gemara says, okay, we can't say that the first two clauses are Rabbi Yehuda and then the third clause is Rabbi Meir. We say, oh, cool, Rabbi Meir, Mishnah Rabbi Meir, Rashani Hacha. In this case, it's different to me. Kara, why Rabbi Meir? If you want to say it's Rabbi Meir, doesn't Rabbi Meir say that you can't make it? That Rabbi Meir says, how can we say? Doesn't Rabbi Meir say that the stipulation is completely canceled if it's against the Torah? So how can you make this stipulation? This case is different to me. Karo Shiba Nafshe, because he never entered into the relationship. So basically, since he never entered into the relationship before, therefore he can make this conditional clause. That's the position of Rabbi Meir. So the Gemara says, can you make your responsibility greater? Tana, so we learned in the Bride. So that the person who's a hired watchman can say, I want to be judged like a borrower, even stricter. When do we say this? You can when they do an actual kinyan, when they do a formal commitment. Even if they didn't do a formal commitment. Why? Because he gets a benefit. The hired worker is getting a benefit because now people are going to trust him more. And so therefore, that benefit is going to be enough to make it a formal obligation. And any stipulation that's possibly for somebody to fulfill in the end is going to be valid. Meaning to say, if it's impossible to fulfill, it's not valid. So Amar Rav Tava, Amar Rav, Zudive Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema. This is the position of Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema. Chum say, even if you can't perform the and if you made this condition, it's going to be valid. Hold on one second. So the Gemara says, Titania, we learned, what's the example? Somebody says, this is your get, condition you go up to heaven, or the condition you go down to the depths of the earth, or that you swallow 100 a kana, a reed that's 100 male amasol. You cross over the sea with your foot. The sky and Tanai are raised again. If the condition was fulfilled, meaning to say, how would it possibly be fulfilled? How could you possibly fulfill these things? So you fulfill it through magic, let's say, or other. Then if you fulfill, then it's a get. That since the condition is so ridiculous, it's still a get. So even though the Tanakhama there says not a get, Rabbi Yehuda ben says it. Tema says it is a get, even though the condition can't be fulfilled. Rabbi Yehuda Tema kol sheyevshar l'kayma b'sofo nisno mitchilaso eno el k'mafliga l'kasha. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema says the general rule: anything that it's impossible to fulfill in the end, and he put it at the beginning, it's just basically like trying to torture her, and then it's going to be valid. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav, Halacha Rav Yehuda ben Teman. So he says the law is like Rav Yehuda ben Teman. Amar Rav Nachman, Masnisin Nami Daiko. Indeed, we can learn it from our Mishnah. Because what does our Mishnah say? The Katani Kolsha Epshar Kaimo, so far, but his no mitchilasa to not kaim. Anything that's possible to begin to fulfill in the end, and he makes it a condition, then it'll be valid, which implies, like Rabbi Yehuda Matema, but if it's something that's impossible to be fulfilled, Bato, it's going to be disqualified. Shmamina. And we learn from our missions like Rabbi Yehuda Matema. Hashola Sapara, so somebody borrows a cow. Somebody, so we're Hadron Chatzocher Sapon, and now we Hadron Chatzomer Sapon, and now we start the next chapter, the chapter of Hashoah. So Hashoah Sapar want to borrow a cow, Vishal Bawa Ima, and while he's borrowing it, the owner is also working with him. So the cow is borrowed along with its owner, or he hired the owner with it, Shala Balam Oscharim, or maybe he borrowed the owner and he hired it, and afterwards he borrows the cow, and the cow dies. So this borrower is going to be exempt because it says in the pasuk, "In Baal Avimo will Yishalim." It says about a borrower, if the owner is with him, he doesn't have to pay. But let's say he borrows the cow and afterwards borrowed the owner or hired him, and then the animal died, chayev. Then he has to pay. Why? Shenemar ba'av enimo shalim mishalim, because it says if the owner is not with him, he has to pay. Meaning to say, in the first case, the owner was with him when he borrowed it, whereas in the second case, the owner was not with him at the time of the borrowing. So the Gemara is going to discuss all these cases. So the Gemara says, "Midikatani safe and sapara," and the fact that the second clause says, "and afterwards he borrows the cow," we call the Reisha, the Katani ima mamish, mean to say that the first clause where it says he borrowed the cow and the owner simultaneously. Ima mamish mimishkachas. How can you ever do anything simultaneously? Parvim shichu balam ba'amira. The cow you borrow by pulling it, and the owner you hire him by just speaking to him. So how could they actually be simultaneous? So the Gemara is going to give the answer. Ibayis ema, two answers. First, could go in the kama parba chatzero de shoel on machasher mashicha. So the cow is in already the courtyard of the borrower, and so therefore it doesn't require mashicha, and so therefore it doesn't require pulling, and so therefore, as soon as he says to him, "Can I borrow you and your cow?" and he said yes, then he's basically in possession of both, and so therefore he'd be exempt if the animal dies. Or else they stipulated, he says, "I'm not going to borrow you until I borrow your cow." So the Gemara says, we learned that there are four types of shomrim, four shomrim. Four watchmen. The borrower, the one who watches for free, the borrower, the one who is hired, and the renter. And this is the mission we just cited in yesterday's daf. Can swear for everything and be exempt. It's called the borrower pays for everything. And not immediately, how do we know this idea? How do we know this idea of the Mishnah of that these four shomrim? So the Gemara says, the Tana Rabbanan, because we learned in the Brayse, but Parasha Rishon Nemar b'Shomer Chinam, but Shnia b'Shomer Sachar, and Shlishis b'Shol, because there are different passages in the Torah. The first one refers to an unpaid watchman, the second one refers to a paid watchman, and the third one is a borrower. It makes sense that the third passage in the Torah that appears, all of them, or the first two at least, in Mishpatim, these passages appear in Mishpatim. So it makes sense that since they all appear in Mishpatim, that the one refers to a borrower, because in the Forsh it says explicitly, Okay, it makes sense that the third one's referring to a borrower, but El Rishona could be Shomer Chinam, Mishneh, Shomer Sachar, Epochana. How do we know that the first one's referring to a Shomer Chinam, and the second one's referring to a paid watchman? Mar says, Mistabra Shnei B'Shomer Sachar makes sense. Say the second one's by Shomer Sachar, being Chayav B'Gnev V'Avedim, because it's a stricter. Because we say he has to pay for theft or loss, so it's clearly he should be strict. So it's obviously not a unpaid watchman; it's a paid watchman. Mar says, Adarabba, just the opposite. Rishona B'Shomer Sachar. No, the first one should be referring to a Shomer Sachar. Why? Because in the first case, if the Shomer Chinam says it was stolen, and then it says it was stolen, it turns out he was stolen, he has to pay double. Whereas the Shomer Sachar, if he pays double, if he says it was stolen, he has to pay, so we can never end up paying double. The Gemara says, paying the principal initially without being allowed to take an oath is more severe than the potential having to pay a double amount. And and furthermore, the borrower, we say he has the highest degree of liability, and nevertheless, he only pays the principal. He never ends up paying the double amount. Gemara says, but is it really the case that the shul has all the benefits? By midone. What are you talking about? He has to pay for the food. Gemara says, no, the kaim bagam. No, he doesn't have to pay for the animals in a swamp. He doesn't have to pay for it. But by Natir, he has to watch it. No, there's already a community watch. He buys Amar, alternative answer. Well, Tamer call Nashalo. Ema Rov Hanashal. A borrower doesn't have total benefit. He has mostly benefit. He buys Amar Bashelas Kam, or it's about a utensil, which he has all benefit completely. Don't say Sachar Basachar Nishbar Nashur. So now we're analyzing this Mishnah, which we really studied in yesterday's daf. So if he's a hired worker and a renter, he has to swear that it was broken and by a total accident, and then he's exempt. So the Gemara says, okay, Bishlam, we know that he has to pay if it was stolen or lost, because it says if it's stolen from him, he has to pay it. How do we know in a case? How do we know in a case where it was lost that if he loses it, he has to pay? If it's stolen, he has to pay. What if it's lost? That's the verse. This makes sense according to when it says the Torah doesn't speak in the normal language of man. But when it says the Torah speaks in the normal language of man, what would he say? And we say it's a logical argument. Just like theft, which is close to being an accident, he has to pay. For sure, you have to pay for a loss, which is close to being an accident. The idach and the other one, why doesn't he learn it from his Kal V'chomer? Mostly the Kal V'chomer the Torah sometimes writes something for a pasuk, even though it can be learned from a Kal V'chomer. Gemara says, the shul pays for everything. The borrower pays for everything. So I understand it pays for broken or deaf, because it says, how do we know he pays if it's captive? If you want to run out from broken or deaf, you can compare it. You can compare brokenness and death to a case of captivity, because you would sometimes imagine it'll be broken or die, but you would never imagine. You would never compare it. You would never anticipate in this wildest imagination that it would be captured. Ela Shavura O Mesa. So the Gemara says, okay, Shvura O Mesa B'Shoal. So it says the idea that it'll be broken and die by a borrower, and by a hired worker. Just like in the case of the hired worker, we're going to say it includes captivity. So too here. But can you challenge him? Can you really say that by the Shomer Sachar, the hired worker will be exempt if it's shvur? But you say by this borrower will be liable. He says, okay, different source. So the extra word "oh" is going to include a captive one. Hi, omi ba'ale. What are you talking about? Don't we need this omi ba'ale to make a distinction? He might have said until it breaks or dies, he's not responsible. Kamash one, Ani Chol Rabbi Yochanan, El Rabbi Yoshai, Ma'ik. So the Gemara says, this is only going according to Rabbi Yochanan, according to Rabbi Yoshai, what we say in the whole Machokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yoshai, we'll pick up, God willing, on Sunday's daf. Everybody have a great day. Yasher Koach. Good Shabbos. I'll see you later, God willing.
Good Shabbos.